Your soulmate will make a request you won't be able to refuse. Get ready for this. There is a certain kind of moment that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with chaos or urgency. It comes quietly, almost gently, and yet it changes the direction of everything. This is one of those moments. You may not see it clearly yet, but you can feel it hovering around the edges of your awareness, like something meaningful is approaching without asking for permission. This is not a warning. It is a preparation. Lately, your life has been moving in a strange rhythm. Not rushed, not fully settled either. You might feel emotionally alert but inwardly calm, as if you are standing in between chapters. You're no longer who you used to be, but the next version of you hasn't fully stepped forward yet. That space you're in right now matters more than you realize. Because this is where the request will meet you. Your soulmate does not come to you in a state of chaos. They arrive when your nervous system has finally learned the difference between excitement and safety. When your heart is no longer searching desperately, but listening carefully. That shift inside you is the invitation. The request they make won't sound dramatic. It won't be wrapped in grand promises or emotional pressure. In fact, it may sound almost ordinary to anyone else. But to you, it lands differently. It touches something personal. Something honest. Something you've been protecting quietly. It may feel like an invitation to stay when you usually leave. An invitation to open when you usually guard. An invitation to trust without overanalyzing every outcome. And the reason it feels impossible to refuse is not because you're weak. It's because you recognize the truth in it immediately. You've spent a long time building emotional boundaries, learning discernment, learning how to choose yourself. You've outgrown situations that once felt familiar. You've stopped explaining your worth. You've stopped proving your depth to people who could only meet you on the surface. All of that growth has brought you here. The universe doesn't reward growth with ease. It rewards growth with alignment. This request is alignment. There is something important to understand about your soulmate's energy. They are not coming to complete you. They are not coming to rescue you. They are not coming to fill a void. They are coming because you no longer carry one. They feel your steadiness before they speak. They sense your emotional maturity. That's why the request is made with care. There is respect in the way it is offered. A pause. A hesitation. Almost as if they know the gravity of what they are asking. And what they are really asking is not for your time or your commitment. They are asking for your presence. Presence requires honesty. Presence requires consistency. Presence requires showing up even when things are calm, not just intense. This is unfamiliar territory if your past connections were fueled by unpredictability or emotional highs and lows. Calm can feel suspicious at first. Safety can feel boring if you were trained to associate love with struggle. That is why this moment feels confronting. Because the request exposes a choice you can no longer avoid. You can either step into something that reflects your growth, or you can retreat back into patterns you've already outgrown. Your body already knows which one you'll choose. You may notice subtle changes happening around you before this request is made. Sleep patterns shifting. Old emotional wounds surfacing briefly, only to be released. A sense of detachment from things that once held your attention. This is not confusion. This is recalibration. Your inner world is adjusting to a new level of intimacy. This connection does not rush you. It does not demand emotional intensity up front. It does not ask you to abandon your individuality. Instead, it meets you where you are and asks one quiet, powerful question that changes everything. Can you let this be real? Not perfect. Not dramatic. Real. That is harder than it sounds. Because real requires vulnerability without theatrics. It requires staying present when there is nothing to fix. It requires trusting consistency over chemistry spikes. It requires believing that love does not need to hurt to be meaningful. This is where many people walk away. Not because they don't care, but because they are unfamiliar with peace. You are different now. You have done enough inner work to recognize when something is aligned instead of addictive. That's why the request feels like a crossroads instead of a temptation. It doesn't pull you forward aggressively. It stands still and waits for you to decide. And you do decide. Quietly. Internally. Before words are even exchanged. This moment also closes certain doors behind you. Not out of loss, but out of clarity. You lose interest in half-formed connections. You stop romanticizing emotional distance. You stop negotiating with people who are unsure about you. Not because you are hardened, but because you are anchored. Your soulmate feels that anchor. That's why they don't ask lightly. They know that if you say yes, you mean it. And if you say no, it would be because you are protecting something sacred within yourself. The universe honors that discernment. That is why this connection unfolds slowly. Intentionally. There is no rush to define, label, or escalate. The depth builds quietly, like roots growing underground before anything visible appears. And that is what gives this moment its weight. It is not flashy. It is not loud. But it is permanent. Once you accept this request, even internally, something shifts in how you move through the world. You become less available to chaos. Less tolerant of emotional inconsistency. More grounded in your choices. More selective with your energy. This is not a loss of freedom. It is the refinement of it. If you are wondering whether you might miss out on something else by saying yes, understand this: what aligns with you will not require you to abandon yourself. What is meant for you will expand you, not confine you. This request honors who you have become. That is why refusing feels like a betrayal of your own growth. You didn't come this far to repeat old cycles. You didn't do all that inner work to settle for surface-level connection. You didn't learn discernment just to ignore it when it matters most. This moment is not about romance alone. It is about integrity. Integrity between who you are and what you allow into your life. And when the request comes, you won't need to overthink it. You won't need advice. You won't need reassurance. Something inside you will recognize the alignment instantly. You may not have words for it right away. But your response, whether spoken or silent, will come from clarity, not fear. This is not the beginning of a fairy tale. It is the beginning of something far more powerful. A connection that doesn't ask you to become someone else. A bond that doesn't demand constant proving. A presence that meets you at the depth you now live in. Take a breath and trust where you are being led. This moment has been preparing itself for you just as carefully as you have been preparing yourself for it. Something subtle shifts after that moment. Not immediately in the outside world, but inside you. It feels like a quiet settling, as if a question that lived in the background of your life has finally stopped echoing. You don't announce this shift to anyone. You don't need to. It lives in the way your body relaxes, in the way your thoughts stop racing ahead of themselves. You realize you're no longer waiting. Not waiting to be chosen. Not waiting to be convinced. Not waiting for clarity. You are standing in it. What happens next doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no rush, no sudden emotional flood, no overwhelming declarations. Instead, there's a strange calm that feels unfamiliar at first. Almost suspicious. You may even wonder if something is missing, because you were conditioned to believe that meaningful connections come with anxiety attached. But this calm is not emptiness. It is stability. Your soulmate senses this shift too. They don't push forward aggressively after the request is accepted. They don't test you. They don't try to secure reassurance. There is a mutual understanding that something real has begun, and real things don't need to be chased. This phase can feel disorienting if you're honest with yourself. You may catch your mind searching for old patterns. Waiting for inconsistency. Waiting for emotional withdrawal. Waiting for intensity spikes or sudden confusion. But they don't come. And that absence forces you to confront something deeper. You were used to surviving love. Now you are being asked to experience it. That difference takes adjustment. The connection begins to reveal itself in ordinary moments. Conversations that don't drain you. Silence that doesn't feel awkward. Presence that doesn't demand constant explanation. You notice that you don't rehearse what you're going to say before you speak. You don't edit yourself mid-sentence. You don't feel the need to perform emotional depth. You are simply there. And that simplicity is what makes this bond powerful. There is also a mirror effect that begins to happen. Your soulmate reflects back parts of you that you didn't realize you had softened. Your patience. Your emotional intelligence. Your ability to stay grounded even when topics get vulnerable. You start seeing yourself differently, not through struggle, but through steadiness. This can bring up unexpected emotions. Sometimes, grief surfaces. Not because something is wrong, but because you realize how much you endured before reaching this point. You may mourn past versions of yourself who accepted less because they didn't know better. You may feel compassion for the times you mistook inconsistency for passion. Let that grief move through you. It is part of integration. Your soulmate does not rush this process. They don't take it personally when you need space to process. They understand that healing does not stop just because love arrives. In fact, love often brings unfinished healing to the surface so it can finally be released. What makes this connection different is how safe it feels to do that releasing. You are not punished for being honest. You are not dismissed for needing time. You are not questioned for having boundaries. Instead, those boundaries are respected. This is where trust begins to deepen, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Through showing up the same way on ordinary days as on emotionally significant ones. Through words aligning with actions without effort. You may notice that your nervous system starts to recalibrate. You sleep deeper. You breathe more fully. Your shoulders feel lighter. This is not coincidence. Your body recognizes when it no longer needs to stay guarded. That recognition changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive. Less triggered by ambiguity. Less interested in decoding mixed signals. Your energy stops scattering and starts focusing. You begin making decisions from a place of grounded confidence instead of emotional urgency. This shift may cause some people in your life to fall away naturally. Not dramatically, not painfully, but clearly. You no longer resonate with relationships that thrive on chaos or emotional confusion. You don't judge them. You simply outgrow them. Your soulmate doesn't compete with your life. They integrate into it. There is a mutual respect for individuality here. Time apart doesn't feel threatening. Time together doesn't feel consuming. You both understand that connection is strongest when it's chosen freely, not clung to. At times, this can feel almost too healthy. You may question whether this level of ease can last. Whether something will eventually disrupt the calm. These thoughts don't come from intuition. They come from conditioning. Conditioning that taught you to expect disruption because that was what you knew. But this connection is not built on unpredictability. It is built on intention. Your soulmate is intentional with their words. With their actions. With how they show up emotionally. They don't disappear when things get quiet. They don't pull away when vulnerability increases. They don't confuse space with distance. That reliability is what slowly dissolves your remaining defenses. You begin to trust not just them, but yourself. Your ability to choose well. Your ability to discern alignment. Your ability to walk away if something ever stops feeling right. That self-trust is the real foundation being built here. As this bond deepens, you may notice a new sense of direction emerging in your life. Not necessarily externally, but internally. Your priorities sharpen. Your tolerance for distractions decreases. You feel guided, even if you can't explain why. This is alignment at work. The request that began this connection continues to echo, not as pressure, but as a reminder. A reminder of the moment you chose to honor who you have become instead of who you used to be. This is not a love that demands constant attention. It is a love that supports your evolution. And because of that, it doesn't feel consuming. It feels expansive. You are not losing yourself here. You are meeting yourself more fully. This stage of the connection teaches you something essential. That love does not need to feel urgent to be important. That depth does not require struggle. That safety does not equal stagnation. It teaches you that peace can be passionate in its own quiet way. As time moves forward, you'll realize that this bond has been gently reshaping your inner world. Your fears soften. Your expectations mature. Your heart opens without feeling exposed. This is not the end of the story. It is the grounding of it. What comes next will require even deeper honesty, not just with your soulmate, but with yourself. And because of the foundation being built now, you will be ready for it. You won't rush it. You won't fear it. You will meet it with the same presence that brought you here. And that is how you'll know this connection was never about convincing you to stay. It was about showing you that you already knew how. There comes a point where calm itself starts asking questions. Not because something is wrong, but because your system is no longer used to things being steady for this long. You notice it in small ways. In how you pause before responding. In how you observe instead of reacting. In how silence no longer feels like a threat, but it still feels unfamiliar. This phase is quieter than the beginning, but it is far more revealing. You start realizing that this connection is not testing whether you are lovable. It is testing whether you can remain open without armor. That sounds simple, but for someone who learned strength through endurance, it can feel disorienting. Your soulmate doesn't challenge you through conflict. They challenge you through consistency. They keep showing up the same way. Not perfectly, not theatrically, but honestly. And that steadiness forces you to confront parts of yourself that learn to stay alert even when nothing bad was happening. You may catch yourself scanning for signs. A shift in tone. A delay in response. A subtle distance. And when those signs don't appear, something inside you softens, then immediately tightens again, unsure whether to trust the absence of chaos. This is where the deeper work begins. Because love like this doesn't activate your survival instincts. It activates your self-awareness. You begin to see how much of your past was shaped by bracing yourself. By preparing for disappointment before it arrived. By holding back joy so it wouldn't hurt as much if it left. Those habits didn't make you broken. They made you resilient. But now, they are no longer required. That realization can feel strangely emotional. You might feel waves of vulnerability without a clear reason. Moments where your chest feels open and exposed, even though nothing painful is happening. This is your nervous system learning a new language. One where safety does not need to be earned through struggle. Your soulmate senses these shifts. They don't rush you through them. They don't ask you to explain emotions you're still learning to name. They give you room to arrive at yourself slowly. That patience is not passive. It is intentional. They are choosing to meet you where you are, not where your wounds expect you to be. As the connection deepens, conversations start touching places you usually keep protected. Not through interrogation, but through curiosity. Gentle questions. Thoughtful listening. You notice that when you speak, you're not managing their reactions. You're not filtering your truth to keep the peace. You are being received, not evaluated. This is where trust begins to root itself deeper than words. You also begin to see your soulmate more clearly now. Not through idealization, but through reality. You notice their patterns. Their limits. Their humanity. And instead of disappointment, you feel relief. Because they are not here to play a role. They are here to be real. That mutual realism creates a kind of intimacy that doesn't need intensity to feel alive. It feels grounded. Shared. Stable. Like something that can hold weight without collapsing. Still, there will be moments when old instincts flare. Moments when closeness triggers the urge to pull back. Moments when peace feels unfamiliar enough to question. Moments when you wonder if you should protect yourself preemptively, just in case. These moments don't mean you're regressing. They mean you're integrating. Integration is not linear. It moves in waves. Forward, then inward. Expansion followed by reflection. And your soulmate does not interpret these waves as rejection. They understand that depth unfolds in layers. One of the most significant shifts during this phase is how you relate to time. You stop rushing outcomes. You stop needing guarantees. You stop asking where this is going every time things feel good. You start allowing things to unfold. That surrender is not passive. It is grounded in trust, both in the connection and in yourself. You trust that if something ever stops aligning, you will know. And you trust that you no longer need to abandon yourself to keep someone close. This self-trust changes the dynamic completely. You notice that you're not trying to impress. Not trying to secure. Not trying to hold everything together. You show up as you are, and that is enough. Your soulmate responds to this authenticity with the same openness. There is no power struggle here. No emotional chess. Just two people choosing presence over protection. This is where the connection starts feeling less like a relationship and more like a shared space. A space where growth is supported, not rushed. Where silence is allowed. Where individuality is respected. You may also feel a subtle shift in your sense of identity. You are no longer defining yourself by what you tolerate or survive. You begin defining yourself by what you allow to stay. That distinction is powerful. It rewrites your internal standards. You don't chase depth anymore. You recognize it. And because of that, you stop entertaining what cannot meet you. This phase teaches you something essential about love. That it is not meant to replace your inner stability, but to walk alongside it. That it is not meant to distract you from your life, but to support it. You find yourself becoming more present in other areas too. More focused. More intentional. More at ease with uncertainty. This is not coincidence. When your emotional world stabilizes, your external world follows. There is a quiet confidence growing in you now. Not arrogance. Not certainty. But trust. Trust that you are capable of sustaining something real. Trust that you don't need to sabotage peace to feel alive. Trust that you can remain open without losing yourself. Your soulmate feels this shift and meets it with the same maturity. There is mutual recognition here. A knowing that what's being built is not fragile. It doesn't need constant reassurance. It needs consistency. And that is exactly what you are both learning to provide. This stage may not feel dramatic enough to talk about. It may not look impressive from the outside. But it is the foundation everything else depends on. Because what comes next will ask even more honesty. More courage. More presence. And because of the work being done now, you will not meet that next phase from fear. You will meet it grounded. Aware. Ready. Not because you forced yourself to be, but because you finally allowed yourself to be. There is a moment when depth stops feeling theoretical and starts becoming lived. You don't notice it at first. It slips in quietly, disguised as routine, as normalcy, as something you almost overlook because it doesn't announce itself. But once it's there, you realize something important has changed. You're no longer exploring the connection. You're inhabiting it. This is the phase where presence becomes consistent. Not performative presence. Not heightened awareness. Just steady being. You find yourself thinking less about the connection and experiencing it more. There's less analysis, fewer internal checklists, fewer emotional temperature checks. You aren't measuring closeness anymore. You're trusting it. That shift doesn't come from certainty about the future. It comes from familiarity with the present. Your soulmate is no longer an idea you're getting to know. They're a person whose rhythms you recognize. You begin to notice the small things. The way they respond when you're quiet. The way they hold space without trying to fill it. The way they don't rush you through your thoughts or emotions. Those details matter more than grand gestures ever could. This stage can feel deceptively simple, but simplicity requires strength. It requires the ability to stay present without stimulation, without drama, without constant reassurance. And you are discovering that you can. What also emerges here is honesty in its purest form. Not confessional honesty. Not emotional dumping. But clean, grounded truth. You speak from where you are, not from where you think you should be. And when you do, you aren't met with defensiveness or withdrawal. You're met with understanding. That response rewires something inside you. You begin to feel safe enough to say things you once kept to yourself. Not because they were secret, but because you didn't trust they would be received without distortion. Now, you see that your truth doesn't need to be softened to be accepted. This is where intimacy deepens without intensity. There may be moments where you realize you're showing parts of yourself that haven't been fully visible in past connections. Not your wounds, but your values. Your consistency. Your calm. These parts often go unnoticed in relationships that thrive on emotional highs and lows. Here, they are seen. Your soulmate doesn't mistake your steadiness for disinterest. They recognize it as depth. They understand that you don't need constant stimulation to feel connected. You need alignment. This understanding creates a quiet bond that doesn't fluctuate with moods or circumstances. It holds steady even when life becomes demanding. You may also notice that conflict, when it arises, looks different now. It doesn't escalate quickly. It doesn't turn into withdrawal or blame. There is space to pause. To listen. To respond instead of react. This doesn't mean disagreements disappear. It means they don't threaten the foundation. That alone can feel revolutionary. You start trusting that honesty won't cost you connection. That expressing a need won't create distance. That naming a boundary won't lead to abandonment. These are not small shifts. They are the undoing of old survival strategies. At the same time, you are learning to hold your soulmate with the same care. You listen without fixing. You support without rescuing. You respect their individuality instead of interpreting it as distance. This mutual respect becomes the heartbeat of the connection. It's here that you may notice how much your external life begins to align. You become more focused, more selective with your energy, more intentional with your time. Not because you're limiting yourself, but because you know what nourishes you now. And this connection nourishes you quietly. There is no pressure to merge lives prematurely. No urgency to prove anything. No fear of taking things slowly. You both understand that what's being built is meant to last, not impress. This understanding allows something rare to develop. Trust without tension. You don't feel the need to constantly check where you stand. You don't replay conversations for hidden meanings. You don't second-guess silence. Your mind settles because your heart feels steady. This steadiness doesn't dull your life. It enriches it. You find more joy in ordinary moments. More patience in uncertainty. More confidence in your choices. This is not because your soulmate completes you, but because the connection supports the person you already are. And that support creates space for growth. You may feel yourself becoming more courageous in other areas of life. Taking healthier risks. Speaking up when it matters. Letting go of what no longer fits. When your emotional foundation is stable, your capacity expands. This is one of the quiet miracles of aligned connection. It doesn't consume your life. It strengthens it. There may still be moments of doubt, moments when old fears whisper. But they no longer have control. You recognize them for what they are, echoes of a past that no longer defines you. You don't need to fight those echoes. You simply don't follow them. Your soulmate sees this maturity in you and mirrors it back. There is no power struggle here. No need to dominate or retreat. Just two people choosing presence again and again. This phase may not feel cinematic. It may not produce stories you feel compelled to share. But it is where trust becomes embodied, not conceptual. It is where love stops being something you think about and becomes something you live inside of. And because of that, it prepares you for what comes next. What comes next will ask for a deeper alignment of paths. A deeper honesty about direction. A deeper willingness to integrate lives without losing individuality. That conversation will not feel heavy. It will feel natural. Because by the time it arrives, you won't be asking whether this connection is safe. You'll already know. You'll be asking how to honor it without shrinking yourself. And that question only arises when something real has taken root. There is a deeper threshold that appears only after stability has settled in. It doesn't arrive with urgency or emotion. It arrives as awareness. A quiet realization that this connection is no longer just something you experience, but something that will eventually ask to be woven into the direction of your life. This is the phase where meaning becomes unavoidable. You start noticing how often this person factors into your decisions, not because you feel obligated, but because alignment naturally does that. Their presence doesn't interrupt your life. It influences it gently, like a current beneath calm water, steady and undeniable. What changes now is not the feeling between you. It is the level of responsibility you feel toward truth. You begin to sense that surface-level honesty is no longer enough. The kind of honesty that talks about emotions but avoids direction. The kind that shares feelings but delays clarity. This connection invites something deeper. It invites you to be honest about where you are going, not just how you feel. That invitation can feel weighty. Not frightening, but sobering. Because it asks you to look at your life as it is, not as you hope it might magically become. Your rhythms. Your priorities. Your unresolved patterns. Your long-term desires. And for the first time, you're not examining these things alone. This is where many connections falter, not because love isn't present, but because truth feels too exposing. It's easier to stay in emotional depth than to talk about direction. Easier to feel connected than to consider what that connection will require over time. But this bond does not shy away from that awareness. Your soulmate does not push you to decide prematurely. They don't rush conversations about the future. But there is a mutual understanding that avoiding them would be dishonest. And dishonesty, even in silence, does not belong here. So the dialogue deepens. Not into fantasy, but into reality. You may find yourselves talking about values more than plans. About how you handle pressure. About what stability means to you. About what you are no longer willing to compromise. These conversations don't feel like negotiations. They feel like revelations. You begin to understand each other's inner architecture. How they respond when things don't go as expected. How they process disappointment. How they define loyalty. How they carry responsibility. These are not romantic details, but they are foundational ones. And as you learn these things, something surprising happens. Your fear does not increase. It decreases. Because clarity, even when it reveals challenges, feels safer than ambiguity ever did. You start trusting that whatever unfolds will be handled with honesty instead of avoidance. That disagreements will be addressed instead of buried. That uncertainty will be named instead of masked with affection. This trust doesn't make you reckless. It makes you grounded. At the same time, you are asked to confront a quieter truth within yourself. The truth about how you receive love. Not how you desire it, but how you allow it to stay. You may notice moments where you instinctively minimize your needs. Where you default to independence even when support is available. Where you hesitate to lean in fully, not because you doubt them, but because you were taught to rely only on yourself. This phase gently exposes those habits. Not to shame you, but to soften you. Your soulmate doesn't interpret your self-reliance as distance. They see it as a strength that learned to stand alone. And instead of trying to dismantle it, they offer something different. Partnership without control. Support without intrusion. That offering allows you to experiment with interdependence in a way that doesn't feel threatening. You don't lose yourself by letting someone in. You expand. This realization takes time to settle. You may oscillate between deep connection and quiet withdrawal, not because something is wrong, but because your system is learning a new balance. The difference now is that withdrawal doesn't create distance. It creates reflection. And reflection leads you back, not away. There is also a subtle grief that may surface during this phase. Grief for the relationships that couldn't reach this level. Grief for versions of yourself who never felt safe enough to explore this depth. Grief for the time it took to arrive here. Let that grief pass through you. It does not diminish what you have now. It honors what it took to get here. Your soulmate holds space for this without trying to fix it. They understand that maturity includes mourning what no longer fits. They don't take your introspection personally. They trust the connection enough to let you process openly. That trust deepens intimacy in ways intensity never could. You begin to feel anchored not just emotionally, but existentially. Like you are no longer floating between possibilities, but standing inside a choice that continues to choose you back. This doesn't mean life becomes predictable. It means it becomes intentional. You are no longer asking whether this connection is real. You are asking how to care for it responsibly. How to nurture it without controlling it. How to let it grow without forcing it. These questions don't feel heavy. They feel meaningful. You also begin to notice how your language changes. You speak less about uncertainty and more about values. Less about fear and more about boundaries. Less about longing and more about presence. This is not because desire has faded. It's because desire has matured. Your soulmate responds to this maturity with equal depth. There is no chasing here. No emotional bargaining. Just a steady mutual investment that doesn't need constant reassurance. You are both aware that what you're building requires patience. That real alignment unfolds over time. That commitment is not a moment, but a series of conscious choices made again and again. And you are willing to make those choices. Not blindly. Not naively. But honestly. This phase teaches you something profound about love. That it is not defined by how intensely you feel, but by how responsibly you act. Not by how much you sacrifice, but by how well you sustain. You stop confusing endurance with devotion. You stop confusing longing with depth. You understand now that real connection feels steady even when it stretches you. Secure even when it challenges you. Supportive even when it asks for growth. And because of that understanding, you don't resist what's coming next. What comes next will ask for visible integration. Not just emotional alignment, but practical presence. Shared rhythms. Shared considerations. Shared responsibility. That step will not feel forced. It will feel like the natural continuation of everything you've already built. And when you stand at that threshold, you won't be wondering if you're ready. You'll recognize that readiness was never about certainty. It was about willingness to meet truth without running from it. And that willingness has already taken root inside you. There is a moment when the connection stops living only in understanding and begins asking for embodiment. Not in a dramatic way, not through ultimatums or timelines, but through a quiet shift in how reality itself responds to what you've built. Life starts placing you in situations where this bond is no longer theoretical. It becomes something you must carry with you into choices, into logistics, into presence. This is where alignment becomes visible. You begin to notice that your days subtly rearrange themselves. Not because you force them to, but because your priorities have clarified. You don't reach for distraction the way you used to. You don't fill silence with noise. You don't keep emotional doors open just in case something better appears. Not because you feel restricted. Because you feel rooted. This phase introduces a different kind of awareness. You start realizing that love, when it's real, doesn't only live in feelings. It lives in consideration. In foresight. In how you think ahead without feeling burdened by responsibility. You find yourself asking quieter questions now. Questions like, does this support the life I'm building? Does this choice honor the steadiness I've found? Does this path respect the connection I'm nurturing? These questions don't come from obligation. They come from integrity. Your soulmate feels this shift too. They recognize that something has matured beyond emotional closeness. There is a shared understanding that what exists between you now carries weight. Not pressure, but substance. And substance asks to be handled with care. This is often the stage where life introduces friction. Not to test the bond, but to reveal its resilience. External demands. Timing complications. Differences in pace. Responsibilities that can't be postponed. None of these arrive to pull you apart. They arrive to show you how you move together. What's different now is how you respond. You don't internalize every challenge as a threat. You don't personalize obstacles as rejection. You don't collapse into fear when things require adjustment. Instead, you pause. You communicate. You consider. This is where the connection shows its true character. You begin to see how your soulmate handles pressure. Not when things are emotionally intense, but when they are practically demanding. How they communicate stress. How they hold accountability. How they balance their inner world with external responsibility. And just as importantly, they see you. They see how you remain present even when you're stretched. How you don't disappear when things get complex. How you don't lose yourself trying to hold everything together. You show up as someone who can sustain, not just feel. This mutual witnessing creates a new level of respect. Respect is quieter than passion, but it lasts longer. You may notice that your definition of closeness evolves here. It's no longer measured by constant interaction or emotional exchange. It's measured by reliability. By knowing someone will show up even when there's nothing to gain emotionally in the moment. That kind of closeness doesn't fluctuate. It anchors. There may be moments during this phase when the weight of reality feels sobering. When you realize that love, if it's going to last, requires more than alignment of hearts. It requires alignment of lives. That realization can feel heavy if you're not ready for it. But you are. Not because everything is perfect. But because you are no longer avoiding truth. Your soulmate doesn't romanticize this stage. They don't sugarcoat difficulty. They don't promise ease. What they offer instead is partnership. A willingness to face complexity together rather than escape it individually. That offer changes how you see commitment. Commitment no longer feels like confinement. It feels like direction. You start understanding that freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the presence of choice. And you are choosing, again and again, to move towards something that reflects your values. This choice doesn't erase your individuality. It refines it. You remain yourself here. Your interests. Your boundaries. Your independence. But they are no longer guarded aggressively. They are shared intentionally. You let your soulmate see how you move through the world, not just how you feel about it. And in return, they allow you into their reality too. Not selectively. Not performatively. Fully. This level of access builds trust in a way words never could. You're no longer trusting potential. You're trusting behavior. Patterns. Follow through. That trust settles into your body. You notice it in how you no longer brace before conversations. In how you assume goodwill instead of preparing defense. In how you rest more deeply, emotionally and physically. Your nervous system recognizes stability when it lives inside it. This doesn't mean there are no moments of doubt. But doubt no longer dominates. It passes through without taking control. You don't spiral. You don't catastrophize. You ground yourself in what has already been proven. And what has been proven is this. You can remain open without being naive. You can commit without losing autonomy. You can integrate love into your life without shrinking your world. This realization changes how you view your past. You no longer see former endings as failures. You see them as necessary refinements. Each one shaped your discernment. Each one taught you what you would no longer accept. That clarity led you here. Your soulmate understands this history without needing the details. They respect the path that formed you. They don't compete with your past. They don't try to overwrite it. They simply meet you where you stand now. This mutual respect creates a sense of shared ground. You're no longer building on hope alone. You're building on evidence. Evidence that you can navigate complexity together. That you can communicate honestly even when it's uncomfortable. That you can choose patience over impulse. That you can prioritize depth over distraction. These are not romantic ideals. They are relational skills. And you are both practicing them consciously. As this phase unfolds, you may feel a quiet confidence settling into your life. Not excitement, not urgency, but certainty rooted in experience. You're no longer asking whether this connection is sustainable. You're experiencing its sustainability. This is where the bond begins to feel less like something happening to you and more like something you are actively stewarding. You understand that real love is not something you fall into and hope survives. It is something you participate in. That participation doesn't feel exhausting. It feels purposeful. You're not giving more than you have. You're not sacrificing your truth. You're not betraying yourself to keep something alive. You're choosing alignment over avoidance. What lies ahead will involve even greater integration. Shared decisions that carry long-term impact. Conversations that require courage. Adjustments that require flexibility. But none of that will feel overwhelming. Because you are no longer facing it alone. And you are no longer facing it blindly. You have built something that can hold weight. And that knowledge settles into you quietly, steadily, like something that doesn't need to be announced to be real. You are no longer preparing for love. You are living inside it. And that changes everything.